What's your job?
I'm a caregiver.
Okay, so you go to take care of old people and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's probably been times in our life when we dreaded to see it getting dark, and then when it got dark, we dreaded to see the morning come. And this is depression. But do we realize that if we allow, God will meet us there? And I think we've had a wonderful opportunity to be encouraged in seeking the things that will help us to understand how to deal with this, and that is by looking how God dealt with people before our time. And if there was ever a person that had reason to be depressed, it was Hannah. Not only did she have a desire to have a child, but she had a co-wife, or whatever you want to call that, that would mock her continually, that would just make fun of her, and she had to bear that yet. And finally, as we know that story, finally she simply started whispering to the Lord. And I wish I had a little time, but do you know why Eli accused her of drunkenness? Because Eli could not control his appetite, and so he was judging her as being drunk. But that's another subject. But what I wanted to come to, even in that state, Eli was able to bless her. Isn't that wonderful? And God heard her prayer, and it was answered. And I'd like to, if I can, in NIV, I'd like to read after little Samuel was born, of Hannah's prayer. And I'm not going to read it all just for the sake of time, but I hope maybe it'll give you an appetite to realize that there really is a reason that there's that when it gets dark, that God wants to meet us there. And remember what Ray told us last night, that we can see further in the dark than we can see in the day. So it's a wonderful opportunity. It's not. Depression is only bad if we stay in that state. If we don't allow God to meet us there. But here's Hannah's wonderful rejoicing when she says, "My heart rejoices in the Lord." Look, notice how she opened that up. My heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord, my throne is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. And she's talking to the Lord. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides him. There is no rock like our God. Do not keep talking so proudly. She might have been addressing this prayer somewhat to her co-wife there. I don't know, but at least it's interesting that she, "Let not your mouth speak such arrogance, for the Lord is God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. The bow of the warriors are broken. Those who stumble are armed with strength. Those who were full hire themselves out for food." Let me read that. Those that were full hire themselves out for food. Those that were hungry are hungry no more. She who was barren has borne 7 sons, but she who has many sons pines away. And I'm going to stop there for the sake of time. And if you want to, she just continues. It's almost like she's bubbling over. She can't stop. She just keeps on praising the Lord. And hopefully that's what we can do as we continue here. So if you want to be ready, we'll pray together. Lord, we rejoice in you as well. We rejoice in the examples that you've given us. We rejoice in you yourself, because you already encouraged us that we should renew ourselves in you, and that we should rejoice in your goodness. So we want to do this. That this morning we rejoice that you brought all of us together here, but especially we want to ask a blessing on Ray. But we also realize this, Father, that without you bringing ears to hear that really hear, that it really doesn't matter what you speak, because we realize that poor old Jeremiah had to speak and nobody heard him. But we trust that there is at least somebody here, and may that be me. comes, that we will be found as a faithful servant, serving you faithfully to the end. May this be also the line of reading this day. We thank you for this, Father. We thank you that some of them can be here. Would you bless them for being here? Oh, Father, again, for the glory of your holy name, we ask this in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
This morning we're going to be looking at the Bible as literature. Whereas the Bible is not just God's book, but it has different types of literature in it. There are different books of different kinds. For example, there is historical wisdom literature. And when you look at the Psalms and it says the trees clap their hands, what do we look? Are we looking for trees that have hands? No. We understand that's different from a book that's telling the commandments that God has given. And we take those factors into account. And we have to do the same thing when we look at the Bible. We're not saying that the Bible is ordinary, it's very extraordinary. But nevertheless, he uses different kinds of literature to speak to us. And so one of the questions you can ask is, why does he include certain material and exclude other material? What kind of point is he making as he presents these things to us? And one of the things we look at is we consider literary form. Now, that's the form of the literature. And as you look at that, you consider the structure of what is written. Now, we're very familiar with understanding a paragraph that's defined by a theme in the paragraph. I'll give you an example if you want to turn to it. It's Luke chapter 21, verses 12 to 19. Luke 21, verses 12 to 19. And I'm going to read these verses, and then I want you to tell me what the theme is that shows this is a paragraph. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake, but it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony. Therefore, settle it in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all for my name's sake, but not
to be afraid.
in the middle. It might be a whole bunch of verses in the middle. That's called an inclusio. It sets a boundary around a paragraph. It's letting you know, here's a section I want to talk to you about. And then we also have another kind of structure called chiasm. And the chiasm has one or more, which is formed of a statement that's written there, A, and then a concluding statement that's similar, A prime. See? So without saying a word, it says, pay attention to the focus. In other words, the structure is there saying that. And we are not used to thinking that way because we think in Roman numeral 1, point A, B, C, Roman places in the Bible. And there are non-biblical sources that have this kind of structure too. So often this is very helpful in learning how to interpret a passage because the author has structured his things in this way, and the audience that he was speaking to was thinking in this inside the previous page. Now, when we were here the other time and talked about future things, remember we had that extended chiasm that was about, 10 or 12 levels deep, and it focused on what short verse? Anybody remember? At the beginning, there's the word heart. And at the end of the verse, also, you have the word heart. So that's an inclusio there, heart, heart. Now go back up toward the top and come down from heart a little bit, and you have the word ears. You got inclusio 1, which is heart, inclusio 2, which is ears, and then a pair in the middle, eye. What it does, it shuts down other avenues of communication also. Shuts down your ears, shuts down your heart. Just like someone was saying the other evening about not liking to study. Some people don't want to study because they don't want to be held responsible And so they don't want to know, so they won't be held responsible. You know what? God will hold you responsible for what you could have known and didn't. Let me give you another quick example from Romans chapter 2, verses 6 to 11. If you want to turn to that one. It begins, verse 6. I'm just jumping in here to a little section. In verse 6, God will render to each one according to his deeds. Okay? Now, look, Ecclesiastes 1. Come down from the top. Verse 7, there will be eternal life for those who do good. And then come up from the bottom, A. Then come up from the bottom, on every soul who does evil, 9b. So you can see that 8a and 9b are really talking about the same thing in other words. Come down from the top. Indignation and wrath, 8b. And up from the bottom, tribulation. Now that doesn't mean there aren't rewards for doing good. Obviously he's stating that here in the passage, but his focus is there in the middle. Now we'll go back to just considering these things. For, or because, he says this because something. That's connecting a reason with the other thing. You pay special attention to that. And there will be subpoints, there will be terms and phrases which connect one Bible portion to another Bible portion. Let me give you an example. Turn to Psalm 92 and hold your finger. The goodness of God, there's variation there. And the reason I chose steadfast love because both Psalms use the same Hebrew word. Declare your steadfast love in the morning, Psalm 92, verse 2. Psalm 52, verse 8, the righteous as an olive tree in the house of God. And Psalm 92, verse 12 and 13, the cedar and palm tree in God's courts. So you can see that these things tie these two psalms together and help us understand more perspective by that connection. Now, studying Hebrew poetry. Hebrew poetry is different from English poetry. And it's a wonderful gift of God that it is that way. Because in general, if you have English poetry that is based on rhyme at the end of the line, that is very, very difficult to translate. It's almost impossible. I mean, there are some places where you can make it work, but then in making it work, you're probably focusing more on trying to get it to rhyme than to get the exact word that gives the meaning. So it would be very, very difficult for translation. However, Hebrew poetry is based on parallelism. There's the first half of the verse, and then the second half of the verse. And there are various kinds of parallelism. And so if you translate faithfully, that will transmit to any language several kinds of parallelism. The first kind I want to mention is found in Proverbs 12. It occurs over and over and over. So let's just glance at Proverbs chapter 12. The second line is a contrast to the first. It's antithetical. So, verse 1, whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but, second line, who hates correction is stupid. Verse 2, a good man obtains favor from the Lord, and then the contrast in the second half, but a man of wicked intentions he will condemn, but she who causes shame is like rottenness in his bones. By the way, how would you feel if you have rottenness in your bones? You'd feel bad whether you were sitting up, standing up, lying down, anything you're doing, you'd feel bad. That shows how terrible that is. If your wife called. And you can see how that could be translated into any language. And you aren't losing the effect. Then there's another kind of parallelism. In some of the older books, it might be referred to as synonymous parallelism. But I personally, Isaiah has lots of poetic portions in it. And so we turn to Isaiah chapter 1. 4 stages. The ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know, my people does not consider. So you can say it has two statements, each one in two parts. Now let's consider this. What is, people try to make poetry and just make something rhyme. Poetry is fundamentally pictures of things. So here's a picture of an ox. What is an ox known for? This is not a trick question.
Strength.
Strength, and what else? Not that smart, right? I mean, people say, oh, you're dumb as an ox. I mean, sometimes people will say things like that. So, here's something that is strong, but what's the donkey known for? Stubborn. But what does this donkey have going for it? According to the text. Ridiculously stubborn, but he knows where he gets fed. So you see the progression there? It's not quite the same, a little bit of progression. And then, what's the next part? But Israel does not know. In other words, Israel is dumber than an ox. The ox knows. Not only that, my people do not consider. Do you see how dramatic? He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the children of Israel. He would have the idea of here's something, and then here is moving forward onto a little similar thing that every person saw. They saw the parting of the Red Sea. They saw the plagues in Egypt. They saw the manna that came. All these wonderful things. When you study Exodus chapter 32, 33, 34, you see that Moses is way above the rest of the Israelites. Poetry has compact example. That man is an elephant. That's a metaphor. You're calling the man an elephant. Now, what is a person liable to think if he hears you say that man is an elephant? What's he going to think? The person who hears you.
Big and clumsy.
Big, okay? It's not that, that man likes to eat leaves off the trees. I mean, that's not the picture that comes to people's mind, even though elephants eat leaves off the trees. You see, it's a picture that conveys an idea very dramatically. So Psalm 28, verse 1, it says, "O Lord, my rock." What does that mean? God is sort of flinty looking? No. It means that God is his secure, safe place. Or Psalm 28, verse 7, "The Lord is my strength and my shield." That doesn't mean that the Lord is made out of wood with pieces of leather holding the thing together. It's a picture of God being your protector. How about this one? Proverbs 27, verse 7. "A satisfied soul loathes the honeycomb, but to a hungry soul every bitter thing is sweet." Now, is the point of that passage to just tell you about dietary issues? That, if you eat a whole bunch of stuff, you won't even want honeycomb. But the proverb is using pictures of things we know to make a deeper point. Now, what's the spiritual point? A man who is satisfied in the things of earth despises spiritual sweetness. By the way, if you fill your heart with chaff, you will have no appetite for the things that are good. You follow me? So you see, when you read Proverbs, you don't just say, well, people that are full, they don't like honeycomb, and if they're hungry, they like bitter stuff. No, there's compact language, picturesque language that'll rivet it in your mind, and that's the purpose. But what I've heard about Facebook, there's a lot of bad stuff on there, a lot of pictures that people post of themselves that should never be posted, comments that are made that should never be made, reactions to those comments that should never be made. But let's just suppose that sometimes we do stuff. So, the poetic books have a simile. And a acrostic is like every 8 verses starts with a different Hebrew letter. In other words, the first 8 verses start with the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet, namely Aleph. The second 8 verses start with the second letter, Beit. The next 8 verses start with the next letter, Gimel. The next with Dalet. And so remember, your English Bible is not going to start with all those letters because you're not reading it in English. That's how it is in Hebrew. But one of the things that does, it shows you that each one of those 8 verse sections is a unit in itself and should be thought of as a unit that can give you greater perspective than just saying, oh, here's just another verse about the Word of God. Each verse in Proverbs 31, verses 10 to 31, the last part of Proverbs 31 about the virtuous woman, each verse begins with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it takes them down in order from Aleph through down to Tau, the last one. So in other words, this woman from A to Z is wonderful. Isn't that great? Now you see, in a sense, that text is saying that without explicitly saying it. Our daughter, who is a Bible translator and reads Hebrew, she says that reading the Old Testament in Hebrew is like seeing it in color instead of black and white. So this would illustrate the point. But nevertheless, even if you can't read Hebrew, and most of us can't, then knowing that fact is useful information because it helps us see something about that text. For example, there's another psalm pair, Psalm 9 and 10, that it seems like was maybe originally written as one psalm instead of 2. Because we have an acrostic that goes from Psalm 9 part way and then picks up in Psalm 10 where it leaves off and goes on some more. So it's sort of a hint there that, hey, this probably was one psalm. In fact, some of the ancient manuscripts would suggest that as well. So when you're studying that psalm, it's very useful to look at both of them together. We might even do that if we have enough time during this week. Now, what about the Psalms? The Psalms focus on emotion and feelings about God. They talk about anguish and hope and despair. And usually it's not a huge theological treatise like maybe you would find in Romans where Paul is talking about justification and how it works. I believe that what we read in the Psalms is one of the reasons that David is described as a man after God's own heart. Because over and over again, David is encountering some huge problem. I mean, the enemies are after him. Saul is using the resources of the kingdom to try to kill him. And he's running away from somebody. And even the people he helped were traitorous. All kinds of things like that. And oh, God, I'm in terrible despair. This is just awful. And then he starts thinking about who God is and what God has done in the past and what he's going to do in the future. And by the end of the psalm, he's praising God. That happens over and over and over. So you see, that's one of the clues of what it means to be a man after God's own heart. Proverbs. Sometimes people go to the book of Proverbs and they interpret Proverbs woodenly and nonsensibly. Now let's think about Proverbs in English a little bit. A stitch in time saves 9. Is that always true? It's not always true. Sometimes a stitch saves 9. Sometimes it saves 10 or 20. Sometimes it saves 3. Sometimes things don't work out and it doesn't save it after all. And besides, we know that that proverb in English doesn't apply just to stitches and nothing else. The point is usually something else. So what do we understand is the meaning? Take care of small problems promptly, and that will prevent major problems later, usually. And the proverb says it in a catchy way that helps us remember. See, that's how proverbs work. How about this one? Look before you leap. Any of you ever tried that before leaping? Is the point of the proverb leaping? Looking before leaping? What's the answer? No, it's not the point. The point is, before you make some kind of major decision, look around and see if it's going to be wise. Don't just leap. Think. Say, guess I'm going to leap after all. How about Proverbs 22:6? Train up a child in the way that he should go, when he's old, he'll not depart from it. Is that an absolute promise? Is that a guarantee? How many of you believe it's a guarantee? How many believe it's not a guarantee? How many of you don't want to say? Well, how do we know that Proverbs 22:6 is not an absolute promise? The first answer is, you can demonstrate from other proverbs in the Bible that they are not absolute promises. For example, there's a proverb that says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he become wise in his own eyes. And right beside it is another verse that says, don't answer a fool according to his folly, lest you become like him. Now, both of those can't be absolutely true all the time. You see? You have to discern which time to answer a fool and which time not to answer a fool. So you see, that illustrates the point. A proverb is a general statement of truth. It is not an absolute guarantee. Or, if a man's ways please the Lord, even his enemies will be at peace with him. Is that an absolute promise? The answer is no. Why do you say no?
Jesus said that if we follow the Lord, we're going to face persecution.
That's right. And furthermore, Jesus, more than any other human being, his ways pleased the Lord, right? And what happened to him? His enemies pursued him to death. Here's another English proverb. Loose lips sink ships. Did you ever hear that one? See, if there are people here that would be old enough, they might have lived through the World War II era, where U-boats were sinking ships, and somebody was a little bit loose with their lips about where sailors might be, you could end up with the ship getting sunk. But that's sort of in the remote past for most of us, and so we don't know that probably here. Haste makes waste. Always? Not always. Sometimes he who hesitates is lost. Sometimes you need haste to escape destruction. How about this one? A bird in hand is worth two in the bush. Is that always true?
Repeat that one.
A bird in hand is worth two in the bush. Obviously, the exceptions are somewhat rare, but if you would universally apply that, no one would ever make any investments, because you've got your dollars in hand, why put them out somewhere that you might lose them? How about this one? The early bird gets the worm. Is the proverb about worms and birds? Is that the point? No. What does that proverb mean? You see, people use English proverbs and they approach proverbs in the Bible in a totally different way in many cases. An early bird gets the worm means a person who gets out there and really pursues things, he's going to get the special reward. Not that you'd like worms, of course not. By the way, how many of you know the second part of that proverb? You ever heard the second line? The early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. What does the second part say? I don't know why we grew up never hearing that second part. It's a wonderful part. What does that mean, the second mouse gets the cheese? The first one's dead. So the second one can go up there with great freedom and eat up the rest of the cheese. So you see, somebody that's trying out some new situation, he might get the worm in the sense of You know, he was there first, he wanted to patent first. But he might make so many mistakes that he loses all his money, and the next guy can look at what he did and say, oh, I know what to do now. What about epistles? Usually, an epistle is written to correct a specific problem. Now, what has happened in many circles is that people skip the first half of the epistle to get to the last half. I was in a church service one time in a conservative Anabaptist church, and the speaker got up and he said, now let's skip the theology and get to the practical stuff. That is a very, very bad statement. Because the first half of each epistle is talking about who God is, who Christ is, what they have devised in the councils of heaven to accomplish salvation, and the means by which that occurs, namely Christ's work supernaturally, death, burial, resurrection, ascension, and the Holy Spirit operating in that whole process, and us being joined to that. Then the second half, out of that, here's how your life ought to flow using that kind of power and that kind of transformation. And the people who jump to the last half of each epistle are building a house on sand. And that's one of the reasons there have been so many houses collapse. Because they have no foundation. It's a lot more work to build the foundation right and then build the house. I mean, you can go out here and just start laying blocks right in the sod. And 3 years later, your house will look like a wreck. But that's how a lot of people do spiritually. Let me have the stuff in the back. That's what I want. Let's get to the practical stuff. Skip this other stuff. I don't want to think about it. Too hard. You see, it's a tragedy. If you don't have that first half, the last half will collapse. Because the first half enables us to understand God's means for us to be able to live out the last half. And the last half is your checklist to see, I'm not doing that. I guess I'm not using resurrection life. See? It'll help you see if you're really tied into this. Another type of literature is parable. Now, in a parable, you must not use every detail in order to extract false principles. A classic example of this would be Luke chapter 16. It's the account of the unjust steward. And the master commended this steward. What did he do? Well, the master was checking up on him and said, you can't be steward anymore. And so the steward said, well, I'm ashamed to beg and I don't like to work. And so I know what I'll do. I'll go to all the boss's creditors and say, hey, how much do you owe? Oh, look, 100 measures of this. Make it 80. That's okay. Make it 80. And he reduced all their debts. So that when he was kicked out, then they had received him into the house. And Jesus said, the children of darkness are wiser than the children of light. Oh, so what is he saying? We should learn from the children of darkness and cheat our employers. No. You see, you've got to get the point that's made of the parable. You don't grab this one piece and say, therefore, I'm justified in stealing from the employer. Or the story of the prodigal son. Remember how the father gave a ring to the prodigal son. And so it is utterly ridiculous to use that as a proof text to say that it's fine to wear rings. I mean, that's not the point of the parable. Wearing rings or not wearing rings isn't the point. That's just part of the story of how the father was receiving the son back with wonderful welcome. Now, I want you to think in your mind about Matthew 13. Matthew 13. We have a number of parables that Jesus gave regarding the kingdom of God. And in particular, there are two little short parables. One is the parable of the mustard seed, and that plant grows up into a big tree-like thing that the birds come and nest in. And the other little short parable in that section is about the leaven in the meal, how that it permeated all of the meal and all was leaven. Now, how do you interpret those two little parables? Jesus did not tell what the interpretation was. But the structure of the passage makes the interpretation crystal clear. I mean, basically, people have just taken a guess on what the parables mean. Well, you know, is it the parable trying to say the spread of good throughout the world? Or is it trying to say that evil accompanies the spread of the gospel throughout the world? Which is it? And people have taken approach A, other people have taken approach B. And the ones who take approach A, they go through the Bible and they find verses that will support their view. And the other ones take verses that will support their view. And they both think the other view is not adequate. So they just sat there and loggerheads. They're stuck. You know why they're stuck? Because they just guessed. They just guessed at what it would mean. And then they found verses to support it. By the way, that's how a lot of discussions are. People take a guess at what they like. They want to interpret a certain way. Then they can find verses from various places, tack those verses on, and say, see there, I've got better verses than you got. Well, that's how people think. This passage, the structure itself, will tell you the answer. Remember we talked about inclusio, where there's something said, and there's intervening verses, and there's something said. In Matthew chapter 13, you have the parable of the wheat and tares. Then you have these two little intervening parables. And then you have the explanation of the parable of wheat and tares. That forms an inclusio, which tells you that's all one big paragraph, which tells you that he's still in the middle talking about the mixture of good and evil in the nominal kingdom of God. Boom. Done with discussion. You see, the structure of the passage enables the writer, the biblical writer, to convey truth without making an explicit statement. He doesn't have to repeat himself. And so we miss out if we aren't taking advantage of the structure that's embedded there. Probably we will, on the last night, cover Matthew 13, because that's not the only structure we find. And it simplifies and clarifies lots of stuff that people have debated endlessly. We probably have time to go over the assignment that I gave you last night, right? The assignment of who was depressed. Who in the Bible was depressed? So, let's have feedback from you now on who you picked to think about that was depressed. And how did God meet them in depression? And how do they respond to that meeting with God? Anybody want to share what they found? Certainly somebody was studying. Okay, over here.
Yeah, I'm very interested. I think it's a very, very important lesson for us to learn how to minister those around us in need, and emotional needs are very great. I don't know, I probably didn't do too much justice on what he was asked and examples was present, but I kind of went more to the focus of how to prepare ourselves to meet that need, or how to search, how to be enabled to. My first one is in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 9 and 10. Little passage that I find very interesting. Just a little phrase in the midst of nowhere. It's important not to put down the Bible. The prayer of Davis. There's a little book that's written, somebody had things that are not here necessarily, but possibilities, and that's pretty definitive too. It says, and Japheth was more honorable than his brethren, and his mother called his name Japheth, saying, because I bear him with sorrow. So there was sorrow here, there was something was going on, but we don't know what, and so he kind of drew our mind to his writer that she might have had a heartache, or maybe it was grief, or maybe in the process of before he was born, maybe his father abandoned him, or maybe he died, or maybe it was a family that was financial straits and how he's going to feed him. There's lots of things that could have entered in there. We don't know. The Bible doesn't state it. And then there's also this fact that maybe this is a family that was kind of looked down on, and they totally got mocked at. And there's another one that's going to have to go through this. We don't know the situation, but she was in sorrow. There was depression. But what I want to bring out is that here was one of the boys, this boy that was named after the sorrow he was going through, rose up above that, and with this little prayer, and Japheth called on God of Israel, saying, "Oh, that thou wouldst bless me indeed." He rose above his circumstance. And that's what we need to do. And enlarge my coasts, and that thine hand might be with me, and that thou wouldst keep me from evil, and that it may not grieve me. And the Lord granted him his request. So we can rise above our depression and our state of being, and call upon the Lord in such a manner with faith. Well, see that he had faith in God and he looked upon him.
Okay. Does someone else have something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I chose for one of them Mary Magdalene,
Okay.
and she found that Jesus was not in the tomb. She was weeping, and she that Jesus came to her in a personal way and gave her a message to tell the others. And I just had to think, sometimes God seems dead to us. When He reveals Himself to us, we have a testimony to share. And then the other two were, I chose the young ruler. And the reason he became depressed is because he wasn't willing to take the advice or the counsel of Jesus, and the result was he forfeited eternal life. And then Haman, when his plan started to fall apart, it says he put sackcloth on his head. But there was an example of someone who was depressed because he had took counsel against God's people, and God met him in a way that
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes. That's good.
Wayne kind of stole mine a little bit, because I had looked at Hannah. Like Wayne pointed out, she was, I guess, from the Old Testament, you were not childbearing, you were kind of looked down upon. And this was really hard for Hannah, along with the other woman that was in her life. And, but when Eli met up with her, or God, spoke to Eli for her, she received that, and then she was glad for that. She received it with joy, and she was not sorrowful anymore. After she received that word from the Lord, and then we see on that, the blessing out of that was, she committed Samuel to God and made sure that he had all the opportunity that he needed to serve God in that way. So she was, in spite of what all she went through, she was committed to doing what God wanted. So that was a blessing to me. And another one that I looked at was Mary and Martha, when they lost their brother Lazarus. I think they were quite depressed because they were looking to Christ. And they know he had the power to heal, and here he wouldn't even show up, and then he died, and they put him in the grave. I mean, that would have been, kind of depressing. They lost it all because he wouldn't show up. But when they went out to seek him, he responded to them. And I'm not sure where, how to put all of that into, the questions that you asked us to answer. But it doesn't say really what the response was, afterward, but we know that they got their brother back. And Christ was able to do that. And another one, I had picked it out, but I couldn't really make too much of a lesson out of it, and that was Judas. He went and took his own life. He was deceptive. I don't know if he had despaired so much in his deception and the thievery of taking, wanting the money back and all that he just gave up and would not repent. I'm not sure where, so I'd like to be taught on that if you can.
Okay, I'll make a comment on that one. I think Judas saw a way to make easy money. Jesus always escaped before. So, the Pharisees would be glad to get the tip on how they could capture Jesus, whether they could capture him away from the crowd. He would be glad to get the 30 pieces of silver. And Jesus would escape like he always did. And so everything would be fine. He would be happy, the Pharisees would be happy. At least in a sense, they'd be happy when they got the tip. They'd be unhappy if he escaped, but everything would be fine. And Jesus would escape and everything would be okay. But it says when he saw Jesus was condemned, then he threw the money down. All those kind of things. Which gets to this. If we indulge in wrong ideas and harbor them and implement them little by little, we will get ourselves into a trap. Let's see, what were the two others you mentioned?
Mary and Martha and Lazarus.
Oh, yes. Mary and Martha and Lazarus. They should have thought like the centurion did. He said, you don't have to come to my house, just say the word and you'll be healed. So just get the message to Jesus and say healing from there. But sometimes we don't think of those things. And it's very clear that Jesus met them and he taught them about the meaning of himself being the resurrection. I am the resurrection. You see, Martha was thinking, well, yes, of course, Lazarus will be raised in the last day. And then Jesus makes the point, I am the resurrection. I'm right here. Your brother will rise again. In essence, now. What he did by that delay and have him rot in the grave for 4 days was he made that family a participant in his greatest miracle. Because here was someone who will be conclusively dead. Maybe the son of the widow at Nain had just gone into a swoon or something, so he wasn't really dead. People could make those kind of comments. Everybody knew that Lazarus was good and dead. Why? Because Jesus said, roll the stone. Why do you say that? So Lazarus can get out? No. Did you ever go to the cellar and get a jar of pickles that, you know, it got pushed back at the back. Now it engulfed the crowd. Blech. And everybody knew this guy was good. God wants to do something bigger than you think. Anybody else?
It's just a wonderful way that Jesus did this. I mean, the example that he gave here was just really, really something. This is it says in verse 34, it says, "My soul is a yes, not what I will, but what God."
Okay, I'm sorry. What is the reference?
It's Mark 14, verse 34,
Okay.
5 and 6.
Okay, what did you want to say about that?
But what I wanted to say about is, it's the Father's will. If we believe that Jesus is in our life eminently, then whatever happens in our life, He orchestrates. And if we are in His will, knowing it's not in His will, and that all things are possible in Jesus' name.
You know, we sometimes have a struggle with certain things. It's very clear that Jesus struggled more than we did because he faced something much more devastating. And that was, he faced the prospect of being separated from the Father. Some people tone that down and they say, well, Jesus wasn't really separated, he just was. Well, whose testimony are you going to believe, his or yours? You know, Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So I take his testimony to be real. He knew what he was talking about. And I believe that Jesus in the garden, who had perfect fellowship with the Father from all eternity past, faced the prospect of having that fellowship broken. And that was the most horrifying thought that he could imagine, having fellowship broken. And he may even have known that he would come under God's curse at that time. You remember in Galatians it says, he was made a curse for us. As it is written, he was hanged on the tree, is accursed of God. I mean, when you see that kind of level, you can see why Jesus was shrinking back from it. So it wasn't that Jesus was just afraid of some excruciating death. I mean, many martyrs have gone singing to death. This is a whole bigger level. And so Jesus there in the garden gave himself up to the will of the Father. And in those kind of terms. Anybody else? Yes.
One thing that stood out to me is how there's different, at least two different types of depression that it talks about. There's depression from loss or exhaustion, physical tiredness, or just simply a tiredness in the ministry that they were doing. And then there's depression that comes from sin and from going against the Word of God. And some of the three examples that I thought of was, the first one was Ahab with the, when he desired the vineyard, he was jealous, and he wanted something, he was envious. He was envious and covetous, and because of that, he went into his bedroom and he turned his head towards the wall and he cowered. He was depressed because of that, and the feeling that God had with that was terrible. But when the biggest, my favorite one was Elijah, and how he, which we covered that a little bit last night, how just simply everything that he poured into the ministry was just simply, it seemed completely vain with what had happened. Like, God had showed up in amazing ways, and yet the people still didn't receive it, and it seemed like that wasn't what was going to, if they didn't receive that, they weren't going to receive anything. And so what God first did is he showed up to him, and he gave him something that would sustain him until he came to a place where he would meet God. And so it wasn't that God just immediately showed up and said, oh, it's okay. But he gave him something that would take him to the place where he would meet God. And then he showed up. Then circumstances brought fire, it brought earthquake, it brought wind. But how God showed up was through a still small voice that ministered to his heart. And then the third one is very similar to that. It's where the disciples were on the Sea of Galilee, and they went fishing because they were so depressed. And we often, I think, it's easy for us to try to fill our depression with work or with
A distraction or something.
distraction of something. And how Jesus showed up and just simply called them in from their work, and he fed them. He made, in that early morning light, he made fish and bread. Where do you get these fish? I don't know, but I think it's probably some sort of supernatural fish. I don't think he beat them fishing that morning.
Maybe he just told the fish to jump out of the sea onto the land.
Yeah. So yeah, that's
Okay, that's good. Anyone else want to mention something? Yes.
Job was one that I was kind of looking at. It kind of stood out to me. Job went through all these trials and testings, and then and he was faithful through that. And then at the end, he says, "Why did I not die at birth? Come out from the womb and expire." He was, and then, or why did why did the knees receive me, or why did the breast that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept and I would have been at rest. It sounds like he was, at the end he was getting, I don't remember where we read it, but in the New Testament it says that some.
Did you want to say any more about that? It's okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Anybody else? Back here?
Starting in verse 4, it says, "And Abel he also brought of the firstling to his flock under the fat thereof, and the Lord had respect unto Abel to his offerings, but unto Cain and to his offerings he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And then the Lord spoke to Cain, and asked him why he was wroth, and why his countenance fell. And he said, If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted, and if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and to thee be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him." And it looked like Cain didn't heed that he just continued to walk in sin, and he ended up killing his brother. And the Lord, he asked him, where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not, am I my brother's keeper? And so he ended up, the Lord ended up anyhow, he ended up basically cursing Cain, and so it was just, he had a very, the Lord gave him a good chance to repent, but he just continued in his sin.
That's right. The Lord gave him a warning. He didn't heed the warning. And then, obviously, there would have been, he could have responded properly to God when God interrogated him. He actually lied to God. And see, that's interesting because Adam, when he was interrogated by God, didn't tell a lie. But his offspring lied to God. And that's another thing about literary structure. If you look at Genesis 3 and compare it to Genesis 4, there are lots of tie-ins. There was sin, and then there was an interrogation by God in both cases. And in one case, Adam admits truth, but in the other case, his son actually lies. So what that's doing is saying there's a connection between Adam's sin and what erupted in Cain. So without specifically saying so, you have all these tie-ins that are literally doing it. And so it's important when you study narrative to see those connectors that are saying, hey, there's a reason that Cain suddenly did this, because he's connected back to his father. Okay, why don't we pause here, and you can lead a couple songs, have people stand so that we get a change of position before we do the next one.
Let's stand. Because we're probably going to Indiana. I'd like to be here when we sing O Heavenly Father. So who wants to lead?